Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Showing Up to Life podcast and YouTube channel. My name is Art Burns, and I truly am excited to talk to you today. This is a podcast and a YouTube channel where we talk about, concepts, and we talk about philosophies, and we talk about feelings, and we talk about practices, and all of these things that we talk about are really guiding us to one massively important truth, right? And that truth is that everything that happens in our lives, every decision we make, every word we speak, every action we take, every connection we make to each other, it all happens right here in the present moment. And so, what we're doing here is in honoring that fact, we're guiding ourselves to dwell in the present moment where all the action is. And this is how we show up to our lives, right? And so today I want to talk about our inner dialogue. I want to talk about talk, how we're talking to ourselves specifically. Because this, it might not seem like it, but this is very, very key to our ability to dwell in the present moment, right? Because everything that we do, every moment of our lives, every experience we have, whether that's an internal experience in terms of a thought or an emotion or a physical sensation, or it's an external action based experience, right? Talking to someone, you know, fighting with someone, making love to someone, all of it, right? At the center of all of this is us because it's our experience that we're having. Now, when I say that, I think maybe the intuitive or instinctive thought comes up that, okay, yeah, I am the observer, so therefore I'm in the center of everything that happens, right? But it's actually even a little deeper than that, and a little bit more importantly complex than that, right? And what I'm saying here, what I mean by that is that it's not just that we are the observer of each of our experiences, which we are, that's true. But more importantly, or very importantly, is the fact that in our experiences, it's us that is having that experience. And what I mean by that is that how we see ourselves fitting in with the experience means everything to the experience we're having. And specifically, what I mean by that is how we evaluate our sort of, for lack of a better word, worthiness or unworthiness of this experience. And that, my friends, has everything to do with the way that we talk to ourselves. Now, I don't mean talking to ourselves like stammering, like, in a ruminative and obsessive way, right? I mean, I'm talking about the inner dialogue that everyone has. We all do it. You're not weird, okay? I mean, some of us do it more than others. Hello, but we all have this inner dialogue. How are we talking to ourselves? And most specifically, because again, the way that we talk to ourselves is essentially the way that we're evaluating our participation, our role, again, our worthiness in any given situation, any given experience. And so why does this become so important, right? And what does this have to keeping us in the present moment, right? Well, here it is. If I'm having a moment of experience, whatever it is, right? Whether, let's say I am, just sitting with my family and we're having a conversation. Do I feel that I am a luminous, amazing being that is worthy of all the love and the compassion in the world? Or do I feel like I am unworthy, like I'm, nobody likes me and I'm, I don't know, I don't really belong or I don't deserve this and I don't, nobody has to give me compassion. You see, that's the way that I'm talking to myself. And in each of those, that is going to present an entirely different experience. right? The latter is going to be much more passive, much more reserved, much more demure, much more, self-sacrificing, right? Oh, no, no, you go ahead without me. It's okay. I don't need to have fun. Or oh, no, 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 I'm not going to take the last piece of that delicious food that I really loved. Somebody else can have it because I'm not worthy, right? Now, of course, this is not active conversation that goes on. It's not me saying to myself, you are not worthy, but it's, in a sense, it's a silent dialogue in a way, right? And so what happens then, right, is that I believe that because I'm saying it to myself. Now, of course, a lot of this has to do with how you were talked to as a child. And how you were talked to as a child has a lot to do with how your parents were talked to as a child. And how your parents were talked to as a child has everything to do with the way your grandparents were talked to as a child. And you can see the pattern. And it keeps going on and on and on. Do you know that to create you, there was like 4,000 different relatives who coupled together to get where you are? Or no, I think it's 2,000 in 400 years. 2,000 people had to connect, you know, and breed and reproduce in order for you and me to be sitting here. 2,000 for each of us, right? And each one is like links in a chain. And it changes as it goes, right? Because each generation has a new experience, which then, sort of molds with the previous generation's experience and then creates the new generation, right? So it's not like a exact copy one generation to another, but it's all in there, right? Like that's, the way that you're, for instance, I'll talk about myself personally, right? My mother lived in a very unforgiving household. Like, I mean, very unforgiving, right? It was constantly blaming each other, it was constantly yelling at each other, it was constantly, there was not a lot of money. My grandfather had to work 2 jobs and they had 5 kids, one of whom had polio. It was a very, very hard life. Right. And so you can imagine in this very, very hard life, the tenderness and the compassion was not there. The encouragement was not there. It's not anybody's fault. It's okay. But the reality, the suchness of it is that it wasn't there. And so my mother grew up in a world where there was no positive reinforcement like that. Right? And so she grew up talking to herself the way that her parents taught to her. And the way her parents taught to her was a place of fear and stress and worry and panic, right? And then she's born, and then she's grows up and has me. And then a few years after, my father decides to leave, and all of that stress becomes the medium on which my mother exists. But in that moment when my father left, if my mother was, offering herself some compassion and telling herself that she deserves a life of happiness, who knows how the difference might have made? What a difference it might have made for me, who had to experience her stress on the receiving end. Right? Now, as you know, I don't like to talk about myself too much, but this is an important thing to understand, right? That it's not, like this. There's a great book that's called "It Didn't Start with You" that talks about this generational, process. But I don't want to get too far, and I'm about to get into like some science discussions and stuff. So I'm holding myself back here because I don't want to get sidetracked. Because really, what it is recognizing, first, everybody always asks me as a coach, right? When I'm working with them, they always ask me, how do I fix it? What's the thing I have to do to change it? Right? How do I make the decision, in my life in this thing? Right? And what I always tell people is that the decision, the action, the solution, that's the easy part. That's the part that comes naturally through the intuition. The hard part is bringing the awareness of it and being in the present moment with it. Because in a lot of cases, when we're trying to, decide something and trying to make a choice on something and trying to figure something out, We're doing so with this self-dialogue that's going on. Now, for most of us, unfortunately, we grew up with the sort of understanding and people teaching us that when things aren't going well, when we drop the ball on something, or when we are suffering, or we're having a moment of difficulty, the answer is to push ourselves. The answer is to get hard on ourselves. The answer is to talk, like hard and stern, and try to affect change through that ugh. Thankfully, there's some amazing people who have done some amazing science around this topic, and they've come away with an unambiguous approach that is absolutely not the most effective way to accomplish our goals, and to achieve or to create the conditions for happiness. It's just not the way it works. I'm sorry. The way it works is for us to become our own support system, so that when we fall, we are there to pick ourselves back up. Because as you know, moment by moment, most of us don't have somebody to pick us up, right? When we're very little, we had our parents who were supposed to pick us up when we fell, right? Some did, some didn't. And even as parents, we know that that's our job for our children. But we also know that at a certain point, our children grow into adults, and they make their own decisions, and they live with the consequences of those decisions. And it's not our job to be there to clean up and to pick them up every time they fall. Right now, of course, you get a spouse, and you hope that this, or partner of some kind, you hope that that person is there to help you to prop yourself up, and in some cases they will. But what about when they fall too? Because all of us all of us are listening to the same dialogue, or not the same, but we all have our own dialogue that we're sort of almost victim to, almost prisoner to. And that's the thing, right? Again, it's not about, so the question might come, well, how do I change my inner dialogue? Right, Art? That's what I want to know. Come on, tell me. And again, the change is the easy part. I promise you, it's the easy part. The harder part is recognizing, is hearing the voice. Because remember, it's kind of silent. It's not like, I have this true voice that I hear that says, hold on a second, we got to pause and let me tell you what's going to happen here. It's just sort of it's like a murmur, it's like a whisper. It's just always there, never not there, unless we're intentionally cultivating the practice of letting it go and not listening to it anymore. That's different. But even in that state, even when we are practiced meditators and practiced in mindfulness and compassion and self-compassion and all of it, there's still that thing that's motivating us. Again, a lot of times it's just silence. It's just a sort of evaluative process that's going on in our mind. Other times it feels very much like an out loud conversation, and that's all going to depend on you and your upbringing and your experiences and your, tendencies and how you've practiced your life. And so there's no right and no wrong here. But the idea, though, is to recognize how this is working within us. Right? Recognize, is it just silent thoughts that are happening, or is it really like a dialogue? Not that it matters. Again, it's you might have just thoughts. I might have a dialogue that's very loud. Like my guy has like a megaphone, but that's not the point, right? It doesn't matter that you experience this one way and I experience this the other way. What matters is, what is the tone of this? What is the impact of this? Is the tone and the impact telling you that you're not worthy? You're not worthy of happiness. You're not worthy of compassion and love and well-being, right? I was just, as I was journaling this morning, it came up to my mind that in so many circumstances, from school and retail, like I had to return something at the store the other day, and even though I asked very clearly, can I return this? Because it was an ace bandage for my ankle. I had to, it's like a sleeve, so you have to try it on, see if it fits. I was like, there's every chance I'm going to have to bring this back. And I was back within like 3 hours. I said, okay, here's my receipt. Here's the product. I need to return it. They said, oh, well, you need ID. And it just so happens that my driver's license expired at the end of last month, and there's a whole hassle with getting it renewed. I don't currently have a valid ID. I mean, it's still clearly me. I mean, you can see it's me on the thing, but because his computer thing wasn't, wouldn't accept it because of the date. Obviously, he wasn't going to change the date for me. Heaven forbid. Just one digit, 3 instead of a 2. But anyway, that's not the point, right? The point is, and in that moment, I had this sense that I was in trouble. Right? It makes no sense. I didn't do anything wrong. I was perfectly within my rights. I mean, I was literally there like 3 hours later. And any reasonable manager would have come over and said, yeah, no, I gotta, this guy has done nothing wrong. But in that moment, I didn't even think to ask for the manager because I felt like I was wrong. I have failed. I don't have this little piece of paper with the right date on it. So therefore, everything is my fault. See how quickly it can seep in there? Now, I wasn't having a particularly rough day. I was actually feeling pretty good about everything. And I was feeling great about the fact that I had this receipt. This is great. It's going to work out fine. And I realized that this sense of being in trouble, again, this goes back to school and every job I've had and every, girlfriend I've had and every, situation with friends I've been in. I always assumed that everything was my fault. I took it on. I begged for it even. Why? Why do I do that? Why does my internal dialogue tell me you're the one that's the problem? You're the fault. You're the one that messed up. It's very simple. It's the voice of my mother and father. I can hear it. And so again, now the question becomes, now to just tell you the rest of the story, I found myself getting very, anxious in that moment. And that's, again, the first step is to bring that awareness, right? So I noticed that, okay, if I don't leave this store in the next 30 seconds, I'm going to say something incredibly rude and dehumanizing to this 19-year-old kid who's just doing his job. So thank you very much. Take my receipt, take my ace bandage, and let my wife come back and return it tomorrow with her valid ID. So I can get out of this without a huge conflict, right? Now, of course, the goal is to be able to regulate myself and to be able to say that in the moment. And this is where trauma comes in, right? We have to respect the fact that this is not just a normal thing. This is not just somebody giving me this unfortunate news that I have to navigate around. My nervous system is reacting like I'm a 5-year-old kid right now. And this is important to recognize in terms of our own regulation and management of the situations, right? So that's different, right? But the point that I'm making, though, is in that moment, the reason I started to suffer is because I was telling myself, not out loud, very silently, very subtly, very sort of underneath everything, I was telling myself, you're in trouble. You messed up. This is your fault. Because you didn't renew your driver's license on time, because you didn't pay that ticket in New York that you didn't even know about 5 years ago. You got no notice from anyone, and now all of a sudden you can't renew your driver's license. Because it's your fault. It's not my fault. It's absolutely not my fault. And one thing should have absolutely nothing to do with the other. I'm just returning a silly ace bandage. And so again, the question, as I said before, the question then becomes like, or the question most people will ask in this point is, okay, how do I change the inner dialogue? What do I do? And that's not the right question. The right question is, how do I become more aware of this inner dialogue? Because once I become aware of it, the changing becomes very, very simple. Very, very simple. I mean, like, ridiculously simple. There's so much the easy part, right? And then what it becomes is, in that moment, you just ask yourself a question, Am I talking to myself? Am I silently believing myself to be worthy of happiness and well-being? Am I supporting myself like a best friend would support me right now?
Or am I talking to myself and processing this circumstance, this experience as an adversary? Am I scolding myself? Am I telling myself, "Yeah, you're in trouble. You did bad. You shame on you." Or am I saying, "Hey, you know, take a step back, take a pause here. Yeah, maybe there was some things that you could have done differently, but this is not all your fault." Right? That's the way a friend would talk to me. Right? A friend, a true friend, a good friend would hold me accountable for what I screwed up and say, "Yeah, you know what? You dropped the ball there. It's your responsibility to be responsible for, or your responsibility to be aware of when your driver's license is expired, and you should have given yourself more time." Fair point. Yes, definitely. But that doesn't change the fact that this is BS, right? This has nothing to do with, I am worthy of better treatment, of more fair treatment here, despite whatever I might have done with my driver's license. The two things are not, one is not, and this is where we come to that idea of non-duality, right? That just because this is not my response, not fair to me, doesn't mean that I also did not have the responsibility to deal with my driver's license, right? Both are true. One does not cancel out the other. And this also, when we start looking at things like that, that opens us up to this simple, act of self-compassion. So anyway, to review again, the idea is not, don't focus on how I talk to myself better. Focus on recognizing how you're talking to yourself. And again, it's that simple question. Am I treating myself as an ally, as a really good friend would treat me? Or am I treating myself as an adversary, the way a mean person, the way for me, the way my father treated me? And then just make the adjustment, right? At that point, it becomes the easiest thing again, right? Because now it's like, okay, I just got to talk to myself like I'm worthy of it. And you are. You always are, no matter what. And so this is how, now again, this is the kind of thing where it's not just like, oh, okay, this will never be a problem for me in my life again. It's a process. It's a process. And so you got to recognize it, and then you got to lose it, and then you got to recognize it, and then you got to lose it, and then you got to recognize it. It's all about coming back to it. It's all about returning over and over and over and over. Now, again, it's not something where you go, 2 days later and you say, oh, you see, this just isn't working for me. No, no, no. You got to set your intention to say, okay, I'm going to do this for the next 6 weeks. I'm going to focus on how I'm processing things. And again, you'll go through vast periods, maybe days at a time, where, oh man, I forgot to do it. I haven't been paying attention. It's okay. Pay attention now. Come back to it. Return to it. And I promise you, if you keep doing that over and over, eventually it becomes a skill. And it's a skill of awareness. It's a skill of awareness of how am I talking to myself. And that gives way to setting an intention in the morning. Every morning I wake up and I say, for me, the intention has become, I am going to use the opportunity of this day in front of me to practice kindness and compassion. That's mine, but you can do yours. You can say to yourself, I am going to set the intention to be more aware of the way I'm talking to myself. It can be that simple. I am going I'm setting the intention that I'm going to use this day to recognize my worthiness of love and compassion. That's a good one. Some days I miss it. Some days it's like 11:30 in the morning. I say, "Oh man, I didn't do my morning my intention this morning." Guess what I can do? Just set the intention right then. It's okay. It's okay. Because this is a process. This is a long, drawn out process that's not, over. Because that's the other thing. I was just talking to somebody this morning about, he was saying like, oh, I still feel like I should be further along. I shouldn't still have to be working on this stuff. But that's not how it works either. There's no point at which things are done. It's just a continuous process for the rest of our lives. And it's always about noticing, okay, there it is. There's my Father's voice in my head. Let me redirect. Let me, correct my compass setting, as I like to look at it. Now, the thing is that when we haven't been practicing, our margin here, as for all of you on the podcast here, are seeing me struggling with my opposite hands that are in reverse and trying to get my hands as wide as the screen here, right? So the margin is this wide to the unpracticed person. But as we practice, we narrow that margin, and now I'm bringing my hands together so that there's barely any space at all. There's still some space, just like riding a bike. It's not like you're just sitting there on the bike. Your body is constantly moving itself to regain its balance. You don't notice it because it's happening on such a micro level. The same thing happens here. Eventually you get to the point where you're course correcting when you're just, moving out like a half a degree. Not 15, 20 degrees where it's like, oh my gosh, I'm lost out here. What am I going to do? So it's never that it's done. Just like even Lance Armstrong, his body is constantly correcting. It's not like he's done and he just rides the bike without any correction. That's not how riding a bike works. It's how it feels like it works. He can be on with no hands. He can, probably juggle, balls while he's riding his bicycle. But he's still course correcting. His body is still constantly in this process of balancing. So the same thing happens with us for our whole lives. It's just a question of how we're doing that. Are we doing that skillfully, or are we doing it like a leaf in the wind, which is just, whatever happens because I have no tools and no skills to manage it. I almost said the word control, but that's a faux pas because there's no control. There's just response. And that response is either going to be self-supportive or it's going to be self-deprecating. Which do you choose? All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it was helpful. I hope it was enjoyable. I hope it was fulfilling. And I wish you well. I'll do my best over this weekend to record a podcast episode, a YouTube episode. But as you know, the weekends get a little tight in my schedule. So we'll see what happens, okay? We'll all, motivate ourselves with the kindness and compassion of our inner voices and say that if an episode happens, it's going to be beautiful. But if an episode doesn't happen, that's going to be beautiful too. All right, everybody. Thank you again for watching. I wish you well. Take care.